Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us for this special cybersecurity edition of Data Science in the News. And this seminar series is jointly hosted by the Queensland Academy of Arts and Science and Queensland University of Technology's Centre for Data Science. My name is David Lovell. I'm a professor in QUT School of Computer Science and in the Centre of Data Science. Now, even though we're all experiencing this meeting online, we're all standing on lands of Australia's First Nations owners. So I would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yugara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands, and pay respects to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. QUT acknowledges the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the community here at QUT and all our communities across Australia. We appreciate there are parts of Australia that are experiencing flooding and devastation as a result of the third year of the La Nina weather conditions. So our thoughts go out to anyone who's been affected by these events, and we hope that conditions will soon improve. So alongside disaster unfolding in the physical domain, we have recently seen disaster in the digital domain. On the 22nd of September, Optus became a victim of a cyber attack that's resulted in the disclosure of their customers' personal information. Not only their current customers, but also past customers, as I learned yesterday. And this information can include things such as the names, dates of birth, email addresses, driver's licenses, Medicare card, passport numbers. All these things may have been exposed. So against this backdrop, we thought it was timely and topical to consider cybersecurity issues from a data science perspective. And I'm really delighted to welcome today our four panelists for what promises to be a very lively conversation. So from the School of Science at RMIT, a very warm welcome to you, Professor Asha Rao, Associate Dean, Mathematical Sciences. Hi, Asha.
Hi. Hi, David.
Over in Adelaide, at the University of Adelaide, we have Acting Director of the Teletraffic Research Centre, Professor Matthew Roughan. Hi, Matthew. You there?
Hey, sorry, on mute.
Yeah, this is the test the reflexes of the panelist section of the show. Let's see how Raja does. Raja, Professor of Distributed Systems and Chair in Applied Data Science from here at QUT. Hi, Raja.
Hi, David. Hello, everyone.
Good to see you. And really delighted to have with us Vice President Digital and Chief Digital Officer here at Queensland University of Technology, Hugh Davies. Hi, Hugh.
Good afternoon. Thank you, David, and a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the rich conversation.
It will be good. Now, the way this session will run is that we will hear 5 minutes from each of our presenters, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Now, we really welcome people's questions and comments as we go via chat or via the Q&A. So please send them in. Our main challenge today is time, and it's a challenge because we could easily spend an engaging, enlightening and enjoyable hour with any one of our panelists. So part of my role as a moderator is to make sure we get a good balance of input from our speakers. So if I interrupt you, it's with that in mind. But let's get started. It's time to invite our first speaker, Professor Asha Rao, to share some perspectives with a particular focus on the data that we give away about ourselves and the ways in which that data gets harvested. I'm fascinated to hear this, Asha, because I think I give too much data away about myself. What do you have to say to us about this?
Thanks, David. Yeah, so I have a lot to say, so I'll try and keep it to 5 minutes.
Sure.
So before I start, I should acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups on whose unceded lands I conduct the business of the university and I'm currently placed. I respectfully acknowledge the ancestors and elders, past and present, and I also acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. So I've got the presentation on the screen, which is why I'm going backwards and forwards. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have had two cases. Oh, no, three. We have Medibank private as well. At least two cases in the last few weeks. We had Optus, and we had My Deal from Woolworths as well. And as we know now, or rather, we're still finding out, Medibank private data has also been leaked. In many ways, you say it's a hack, but it is better to talk about this as a leak. Why? Because if they protected the information enough, we could assume that it wouldn't leak. So it's a leak. So it's like a pipe and you've broken the pipe. And it's information, especially in the case of Optus. You take a pipe, you take a fire hose and you break it, and the information gushes out. So one of the things I also found out just yesterday, it was so timely, David, was that I got home and there was a letter from Optus. Now, I've never been an Optus customer. The letter was addressed to a previous resident. Now, I've been in this house over a decade. So that makes me think, how far back are we going? How much data has Optus retained? So going on to the, yes, I've got huge pictures. Another one. Sorry. My mouse is okay. Here we go. So before what I call CE, the computer era, when we did harvesting, we would harvest bits and pieces in our backyard, maybe, and two carrots, 4 turnips, or whatever. Now, the way harvesting happens is you have the combined harvester, which is coming in using, and this is exactly what's happening with regards to data. It's collecting data. It's hoovering data up like there is no tomorrow. And what do we gain? We gain, in some ways, we gain a little bit from that harvesting, in the sense that, as companies point out, they can tailor products to us. So, of course, if you think about Medicare or Medibank, or even in maybe even Optus, having data about us would help them. But it then gets me thinking, what data? So what is happening is, with the combined harvester, or when they throw the nets into the sea and they collect all the sea, creatures which are happening to be floating past, are we doing the right thing? Catching dolphins in nets which are supposed to be catching tuna. So what is the purpose of this? So then you have the next bit, data retention. I'm so sorry, this is going backwards and forwards. This is cybersecurity not working. So, and then we have the retention. We have these huge warehouses where the data is being kept. And you don't know whether there is a mouse or an elephant in there. So for all we know, especially when we look at what's happened with Optus, it's not just a mouse or a field of mice which have got in. It looks like an entire herd of elephants have gotten in there. And it was, as they say, it was an API which was open, which was not secured. So then we have the question is, what should we be doing? And I was asked this just yesterday. What should we be doing? The first thing is that this problem has to be addressed at different levels. There is stuff that corporations have to do. But as we know, corporations are not doing. They're not doing everything that they're supposed to do. So the government has, governments, not only in Australia, but everywhere else, has something that they have to do. They have to make laws, maybe more punitive, so that, they take it seriously. We have laws for money laundering. Where the penalty for somebody money laundering, a person, I think, is about 1.5 million. And for a corporation, 3 million per case. So huge. And we know that the penalties for both Westpac and then later Commonwealth Bank have been huge. In I think it was 700 million or something like that for Westpac, and 1.2 billion was the penalty for Commonwealth Bank. So we need that from the government, because we can't protect. We don't even know what information is being held on each of us. And the other side, we, the public, what should we do? Our data, we have to realize our data is priceless. We should stop and think and ask why. Why do you need this information? And how are you storing it? If enough of us asked, something would happen. I think too many of us are, as you pointed out, too many of us think, oh, it's easier, as they say, and this really gets me, my imagination blowing out, is you say that in security, you say every day security is sacrificed on the altar of convenience. And I always think of a young woman being pulled up that thing and being slaughtered. Sorry, this is my brain. So I'll basically stop there. That is what I feel we need to do.
Asha, thank you so much. And I can see that your presentation has evoked some questions from our audience already, which is great. We will dive into those a little bit later. I must restrain myself from asking you questions now because I think it's such a fascinating topic. Thanks for getting us off to such a really great start. Our next speaker, Matthew Roughan, comes to us with a wealth of experience in telecommunications and networking. And let's face it, communication in some form has to be one of the key ingredients in cyber threats. So Matthew, could you give us a bit of a data-oriented view of cybersecurity from the very foundation of the communication stack where the bits and bytes live? Could you give us a take on that?
So very happy to. I guess it's sort of the way I view it a lot, because I come to cybersecurity from a slightly different background from a lot of people. My sort of core research is on communications networks, data networks, and we're coming in contact with cybersecurity problems all the time. So I come from that direction, but I also have a signal processing, data science, math background. And so, that's the way I tend to approach problems. The topics that I've been working on in the cyber sort of domain, roughly speaking, we've been doing some work over the long term on privacy, a little bit on formal methods, but a strand of that I thought might be interesting for people here is about anomaly detection. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about that today. It's about detecting bad stuff, detecting it quickly, in such a way that you can work out what it is and do something about it. And there's, roughly speaking, two big strands of this. There's what I would call signature detection, which is detecting things that we know about. It's detecting old attacks, old viruses, things that have been around for a while. And this is a classical classification problem. We can do supervised learning on it. Typically, we have large data sets, at least large enough. They're often decent quality. And there are a lot of commercial companies out there that are already doing this. The problems that I'm more interested in as a researcher are in this anomaly space. And I put quotes there because it's hard to define what anomaly detection actually means. And you talk to 3 people, you get 4 opinions. The data sets are bad. It's hard to find big data sets. And when you do, they're often poor quality. They're often unbalanced. There's very small numbers of anomalies in a very large data set. But the area is really useful because a lot of cybersecurity threats are new, they're novel things, and they happen once, or they appear suddenly. And being able to detect them quickly and react to them quickly is incredibly important. Just happens to be really hard. Within this space, I think the vast majority of work is on what I would call volume anomalies. And this is really just time series. It's really transform your data in some form and then do outlier detection. And there's thousands of papers on this, but they all, in my mind, are the same thing. Transform the data, do outlier detection. So people with a stats background, you'll be very familiar with all of these sorts of techniques. Doesn't mean that they're easy, doesn't mean that they're trivial, but there's a lot of work in that space. What I'm getting more interested in these days is what I might call structural anomalies. And this is anomalies in the structure of the traffic we're observing. So I just wanted to give you the most trivial example, which is a TCP handshake. TCP is a transmission control protocol. It underlies all of the packet traffic, or very large volume, 95% of the traffic on the internet. And every TCP connection starts with a handshake, and the handshake goes SYN, SYNAC, ACK. So this is a very simple finite automata. And if you see things that vary from that, you know something's going wrong. Now, this has been known for decades, and there are ways of dealing with this particular one around for a long time. So this is the sort of simplest possible example, but there's a lot of scope for understanding the structure of the traffic you're observing and using that to detect unusual things that seem to be going wrong. Okay, I wanted to circle back to Optus and circle back to the things that Asha was saying. One of the things that is a problem with something like Optus. Asha highlighted this about the past customers. I'm a past customer of Optus. I don't have an account with them at the moment, but my data was released. Companies are making this big grab for data, and part of it is our fault. Data scientists have been saying data is the new oil, data is worth millions, data is this huge resource to be mined. So we've been selling that message for now more than a decade at least. And so companies are harvesting data, they're keeping it, and they're trying to grab as much as they can. I think a better analogy for these sort of data sets is toxic waste. And the analogy of leakage is really good, and you should be thinking about leakage not of water but of toxic waste. If you're keeping a large warehouse of this stuff and you don't have a really direct use for it, you are opening yourself to massive liabilities. And that's, I guess, where I wanted to leave my little spiel. So I'll hand it back to David.
Matthew, I like that analogy. Shannon Valor, who is an ethicist working in the data domain, speaks about data as a conditional good, and the metaphor that she uses there is not like toxic waste, but it's like guns. You don't let people walk around unlicensed to carry guns. But as I was listening to you present, it suddenly dawned upon me that many of the concepts we're speaking about have parallels in immunology. So the human immune system has an innate response, which has been learned to respond to deal with active, previously seen threats, and it has an adaptive response. Matthew, does that metaphor ever creep into work or thinking?
I mean, we've been using that metaphor since day one. So people, when they were talking about a lot of the early threats, would talk about viruses or talk about worms. We start with that biological metaphor. There are quite a lot of people in this sort of domain of anomaly detection who've talked about artificial immune systems.
Yep.
They explicitly use that metaphor. I don't so much, and why is that? Just thinking aloud, it's because maybe it can confuse as well as help explain.
I think that's part of the double-edged sword of a metaphor, and we'll deploy a few before this session is out. But Matthew, for the moment, thank you very much for giving us a lower level view of the transactions that ultimately give rise to the cyber threats we're talking about today. And now, while the Optus data breach has serious ramifications for individuals' online identities and privacy, Raja Jurdak is here to discuss the world of cyber physical systems, where cyber attack could very easily lead to physical harm. So Raja, I feel nervous. Should I be?
Unfortunately, I think you should, David.
Okay. Keep
I'm
going.
going to tell you why. So while currently a lot of the attention is on the most recent data breaches, where we actively give these service providers our data, what I want to talk about today is cyber physical security, where data about us is being collected in the background through automation, and we don't necessarily know about it. And that data can also be harmful to us and to businesses. So first, I want to briefly define what we mean by cyber physical. And essentially, we're talking about systems that help us automate existing things that we do, using sensors to monitor the state of the environment and actuators to take actions and do things in the physical space. And essentially, this bridges both the cyberspace and the physical space. And because of the significant growth of the Internet of Things and these kind of sensor devices in industrial settings, in home settings, medical settings, this problem is only going to, well, the opportunities are increasing with this technology, but also the cybersecurity risks can be expanded as well. And cyber physical security has been a growing challenge. One of the early attacks was Stuxnet, which happened in Iran in 2010, where a USB stick was used to basically infiltrate a secure nuclear facility. There was an air gap, so that facility was not connected to a network, but using the USB stick, a worm was released there, and that caused physical damage to that facility. In 2016, there was an attack, distributed denial of service attack, that was taking advantage of a lot of Internet of Things devices that were poorly secured to launch large-scale attacks on the internet and bring down major servers for many hours. And then in 2021, in the US, there was a ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline, which supplies 45% of gas to the US. And again, that caused significant disruption there. In 2022, there was an attack on the Ukrainian power network, a cyber attack that brought the network down. That was a follow-up attack to a 2016 attack as well. And because of all of these developments, the Australian government has introduced amendments to the security legislation to define critical infrastructure requirements and the requirements for protecting things like the power grid, supply chains, and other critical infrastructure from cybersecurity attacks. But also, it's not only industrial settings. We do have these devices in our homes. For those of you who have smart meters or smart gas meters, but also all the home automation devices that we're using, whether it's Amazon Alexa or your security alarms, smart door locks. And typically when we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about the three goals of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So we don't want people to know about our information. We want it to be untampered with, and we want it to be available when we need it. But when we deal with these kind of cyber physical systems, we also need to think about whether we trust these systems to do what they're supposed to do. And that brings about things like transparency, auditability, and accountability that are quite important for these systems. And in our research, we've been looking at these issues by applying blockchain in cyber physical context, and we published a book a couple of years ago about it. And just in the couple of minutes I have left, I'm going to cover a couple of case studies that we dealt with for cyber physical security and how we try to address it. So one of them is in smart homes, we observed that even encrypted data from your home sensors can still reveal things about your activities. It can tell a potential attacker who has access to the data what types of devices you're using, and that can reveal what your activities are, whether you're home or not, and what you're actively using in terms of devices. But there are some obfuscation methods that can be used to basically break the temporal signatures that is evident even in encrypted data of those devices that can protect the confidentiality and privacy of people using these devices. Another example is we're seeing a lot of proliferation of smart meters, and we know that the energy market is going through a significant transition, particularly with renewable energy sources and people not just consuming energy, but also producing it. So, and we are seeing also community batteries and peer-to-peer energy trading becoming a reality. But through that, you need to trust who you're trading with, and you need to protect your privacy as well. And in our research, we looked at achieving those two goals that are sometimes in tension by proving when you're trading that you are dealing with a genuine smart meter, proving your location without necessarily revealing where you are exactly, so that the trading can happen in local areas, which actually reduces costs, and also in a trusted way. And just the final use case that I'll talk about is looking at autonomous cars, which are a form of cyber physical systems as well, and looking at when these cars have an accident, who's to blame? And there have been some accidents that have happened over the years. And particularly what we need is a reliable audit trail that's not owned by any one of the parties, that the potentially liable parties, like the manufacturer or the software developer or the owner. And that's again where we use blockchain to have that transparency, the audit trail of what has happened, so that the relevant parties can make decisions and provide accountability. And with that, I'll hand it back over to David.
Yeah, thanks. I'm now more nervous, Raj. Job done. Yeah, and it's interesting coming through the presentation so far. One of the things that's in the back of my mind is about who holds the power in relation to where information is kept and how it's used. So we might return to that in the Q&A session. For now, Raja, thank you very much. Our final speaker wins my pick of the panel for person doing the toughest job. So in terms of cyber threats, I've heard universities described as a breeding ground, a melting pot, a magnet, a crucible, whatever the metaphor. As VP of Digital and Chief Digital Officer for the University of the Real World, Hugh Davies, you have my respect and admiration and appreciation for steering us through a really challenging environment. Hugh, am I right to see universities as organisations that are particularly exposed to cyber attack?
Thank you, David, and I think absolutely. And just to give the audience a little bit of my background, it's historically not actually higher education, but I came out of a manufacturing, mining, and oil and gas background. Now, having seen those industries and been heavily involved in IoT and the ramifications of that, and how we as the higher education university sector are now getting into those areas, I'd say, yes, we are that breeding ground for a much higher threat vector than probably we've been previously. And by virtue of what institutions do, as I'm finding out, been in the higher education sector for the past 2 years, by virtue of what we actually do means that we're a target, and kind of the controls that I would have put in place in historical industries that I've been into, you're unable to a certain degree. And there's a cultural element there as well, where the maturity of understanding the real threat of cybersecurity and attacks, and the personal responsibility that we all as individuals do inside institutions have in relation to cybersecurity. So I'd say, yeah, that there is a convergence of technology, culture, and by virtue of what we do in the sector, they're coming together actually. So yes, and I'll probably start by just giving, from a QUT perspective, some statistics. And effectively, at the moment, in the last month, we had 35,906 active malicious threats that we were monitoring as QUT, and we had 192 incidents that we were actively assessing. One of those actually got closed down this morning by Interpol, which was the threat actors coming out of South Africa, which we had a significant interest in QUT, and we had to work quite extensively with law enforcement to understand that threat vector, be able to identify that and contain it, and ultimately work with the authorities to get those threat actors closed down. So it just comes, brings to life some of the information we've had from the other panelists as well. And if I kind of think about the context of the university and where universities probably are as a sector in terms of their evolution into digital, is slightly slower than we've seen in other industries, and there's no question of that. We still have a fair prominence of on-premise infrastructure and data under management, and as QUT right now, we actually hold 22.3 petabytes of data that is under active management today. So when we think about that warehouse of data, we have an extreme amount. And just by put that into some context, that's about I think it's 29 million filing cabinets, or 80 years of continuous high definition streaming, just to put some context of what that is. And for sure, we've got too much information. And I think, as we look at the fallout from the recent cyber events. It'll be around data retention, why we're retaining it, what are the policies, and I think the legislation needs to help us in that regard, as well as some of this fallout that we're going to see coming through over the next couple of weeks as well. But from my perspective, I think one of the other things that we're seeing from a university perspective is that historically we've been protecting our assets as an institution, if you want, whereby we put a perimeter around ourselves and we protect from the perimeter. And what COVID has done is remove the perimeter, because everybody's working from home, there's flexible working. So we're moving to a zero trust based model, which is a change in our cyber posture, our cyber tools, and we're having to adapt, and we're having to move with that. And I think one of the things that I am seeing is a much higher appreciation from the council within QUT about the requirements of that, and how we're actually getting funding and support for the movement in our cyber posture to making sure that we are protected. But it does take time, and that's the problem. It takes time. We can't just turn these technologies on. And going back to what I was saying about, we are still hold a lot on-prem, a lot of legacy technology. We just can't quickly move in terms of doing that. So we're always playing a risk game around how quickly we can move and how much functionality we're potentially taking away from people. And certainly the academic community, obviously, we need to wrap our arms around that. And we can only protect what we know. And my biggest concern, and what keeps me awake at night, is what we don't know, what we can't wrap our arms around, is really what worries me, and is one of those things that we've got to work on, which comes down to culture. And if I think about culture and cybersecurity, and I use this analogy a lot when I talk about cybersecurity, if I look at my previous experience in other industries, being oil and gas and mining, and I joined the mining industry over 22 years ago, health and safety was something we spoke about, something we know we needed to improve. But you look at health and safety in mining or oil and gas now, it is the number one. It is, and the only way that those industries got there was by talking about it, being the number one priority, putting initiatives in place, educating, and having the frameworks in place. I think we need to do that from a cyber perspective. We almost need that cultural change to be driven inside organizations, that our data security is a cultural issue, and we need to talk about it in the same way that we've talked about health and safety in many industries for a number of years. I think that's one of the important aspects that we need to drive forward with. And I'll stop there.
Wow, that's a really interesting point to make to an audience who many of whom come from a data science background, because I think you're right that the culture needs to change. And from my own lived experience, I think our culture of working with big data tends to be a bit cavalier. And with that in mind, I'd like to go to one of the questions that's come into us from Ian, who is asking a question that is sort of at the heart of why cybersecurity and cyber threats are so troubling, is that in this information age, or CE as you described it, Asha, the computing era, we are steadily, in some cases exponentially, becoming more reliant on large amounts of data for our institutions and organizations to function. So Ian's question, and I like it because it's brief, says, in your opinion, do you think that over-reliance on big data has more pros than cons in the long haul? Asha, would you like to take a bite at that first?
Sure. It has got pros and it has got cons. And I think every day the balance shifts between the two. I really like that. I'm directly on that fence. So it has got pros because it does allow organizations and even people to judge for themselves what they need to do, what they want to do, and how do they do it. For example, by having a fitness app, you can track how much of exercise you're doing, for example. The problem is, what happens if that fitness app, for whatever reason, doesn't work? Are you then not going to exercise? And that's where the con is. The pro is, yes, it keeps you on track, but the con is, how reliant are we? What will happen if something does not work tomorrow? And I still remember the case of one of my friends who has a car which has got the rear vision camera, which she uses to reverse park. And it just happened one day. We were out, it was raining, the camera had a drop of water on it, didn't work. And the person found it really, really hard to park. And the person was not doing reverse parking, they were doing straight, but they had to straighten the car out and bring it back into the car spot. And that was very difficult. Something that those of us who don't have a rear vision camera do it every day.
Yeah, sure. And I still manage to bump into things, which is why. But
you do touch parking, do you?
Yeah, very gentle. But I think it's an interesting question, the extent to perhaps to which we come to rely on big data or just technology in general. Matthew, do you have a view, a long-term view? Are you thinking, look, broadly speaking, we're heading in a good direction, there are some challenges, or do you have some nervousness about the extent to which we rely on big data and therefore are vulnerable to cyber attack?
So I think you can guess from my comments that I have some nervousness, but the reality is big data is so useful to us. So we for example, we're going through an era where health records are being digitized. Hospitals are digitizing their systems, and that will save lives. Undoubtedly, that will save lives, many lives. That's a good, an unalloyed good. But if that health data becomes leaked, it's awful. And so I would hope that the protections on that data are extremely strong. And I worry about that sometimes, but this is true in almost every area. Big data is incredibly useful for so many purposes that we're not giving up on it.
I just jotted down the words informed addiction. It seems to be a little bit like that.
I don't think of it as an addiction. There is a good. There is like something that we're getting out of it. It's like food. We're not addicted to food. We eat food to stay alive.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I have to think of Raja. What's your take on the extent to which we are becoming increasingly reliant on big data and these technologies which are vulnerable to cyber attack? Do you think in the long term this is going to work out well for us?
Look, I mean, echoing the others' comments, I certainly agree that big data has brought a lot of benefits, and it continues to do that across many aspects of our lives, whether it's for discovering new cures for diseases or better services. I think when you asked that question, I thought of the EU GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and basically our data will be collected, but we should have visibility and a say about what is collected and how it is used and for how long it's collected. And I think that is probably a way to modulate the volume of data that we give away, for how long it's being used, so that issues like the Optus leak, after 10 years, somebody's still getting their data leaked, even if they're not an Optus customer. Those issues shouldn't happen. But I think on the balance, the benefits of big data are high, but we need to ask for better cybersecurity and more visibility and control for users about what happens to their data.
Yeah, look, that actually leads nicely into one of the first questions we got in this session from Alice Miller, who was saying that, we've long had warnings about cybersecurity and threats, yet our responses still seem to be, quite reactive. I wonder, in the face of novel threats, whether it is possible to do anything other than sort of be reactive. With that in mind, Hugh, I just wanted to ask you, when you heard news of the Optus data breach, what were the thoughts running through your mind as CDO of a large organization?
I think the first thought is, oh my goodness, not another one. And the second thought is, okay, what was the threat vector and are we exposed, and how do we protect our institution as QUT from that? Then I think after that, it goes down to my customer. What does that mean for me, and what does it mean for potentially us as an organization? And I think as an industry that kind of keeps people secure and organizations secure, I think each threat is, and each incident is different. So it's very difficult to come up with a playbook, and you can put out holding statements, etc. But the time pressure that organizations are under to notify, and then the media pressure, and even in this case of Optus, the political pressure that comes after that is immense. So the whole apparatus is designed for a quick turnaround. People want answers, and it's very difficult to get them in that short space of time. So is there a playbook of response? I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we can even play all the scenarios that are potentially insider environments to get our arms around. So I think it's a very, very complex situation, how we respond to them, and each organization will respond differently, and we don't actually, and a lot of times we don't actually know how big the issue is when we have to report it, and the media gets hold of it, and it becomes a bigger issue, and you lose the control of the narrative at that point.
So just picking up on Alice's the second sentence there, when will data custodians switch to more proactive efforts? My guess is that you're being as proactive as you can at the moment, and it's the nature of the novel threat that leads to a reactive response. Is that a fair summation?
That would be an exact summation. And I think, going back down to the previous question, as well as why are we storing all this data? We need to get to the point of where I'm driving is just hold the information that we need, so we know what's controllable. So we know what's going. Why are we storing everything? And go back to my opening about the 22.3 petabytes. We don't need all that. We need to get down to holding the information that we really need, notwithstanding the big data does bring a lot of benefits, but we need to know what they are, and where there is none, we have to get rid of that data so we can control it a lot easier if we are exposed to an incident.
I want to take that idea about holding a minimal amount of data and loop back to something that Asha said at the beginning, which is about we as the people who are supplying the data should be a bit more circumspect and mindful of the value of the data we share, and that makes me think of the word power. The people who are harvesting the data have power. We, as the people who grow the data that's being harvested, have power. I'm not sure we have much. Asha, where do you think right now the balance of power lies between those of us who are growing information that's interesting to the harvesters and the people who would like to harvest? Where do you think the power balance lies?
At this point, in many cases, it lies with the companies, the ones who are harvesting. And this is the case even with agriculture, with real food. Everywhere, what has happened is that large corporations are harvesting, whether it is data or it is food. It doesn't really make much of a difference. We don't have too much power, but maybe it's time we took that power back. Maybe it's time we stop. So if you go into a shop and you buy something and they say, oh, can we have your mobile number, or can we have your email? Think before you give it. I'll give you a few points. So if you sign your data over, really, are you going to use it that much? Is it really going to be that, do you really need 4 emails from that company every single day? Because that's what you will get. Yeah, and I find even if you're shopping online and you are buying something and you opt out, you still get emails.
Okay, well, let's talk about something where it might be a little bit more difficult to opt out. And I think Raja provides some good examples there with regard to smart metering. Raja, if I'm subscribing, if I'm wanting to get energy supplied to my household, would I be able to opt out of a smart meter in future, do you think?
Look, it's getting harder to these days. And I think the energy retailers are encouraging people to adopt smart meters when they're switching to offer them better services, quote unquote. But I think there is probably a middle ground there where if there was some regulation saying, does the retailer or the energy operator really need data every second or every high frequency data from our smart meter, or do they need aggregates for our neighborhood to determine the supply and demand in the area? And striking the right balance, talking about power, currently I agree with Asha that the power is disproportionately with the harvesters, but we do need both government regulation to help us strike a better balance, and we do need to, going back to the farming analogy, we do need to become more local growers and to have those local cooperatives where we take more ownership of the data and adopt and advocate for more decentralized approaches for managing it, where rather than sharing the data, we can share insights from the data that don't necessarily reveal things about us.
Yeah, Matthew, you were saying yesterday as we were getting ready for this session that you got a letter from Optus. However, you're not a current customer. Given what's just been described about sharing information and only sharing what's necessary, can you imagine how things could have worked out better for you in terms of your relationship with Optus? What might that have looked like at the time you gave your information to them? So
can I bring this back to, I think, Alice's question originally, which is about whether companies should be doing more?
Sure.
There clearly is a very hard problem in this space. Cybersecurity is really difficult, but it seems like they dropped the ball here pretty badly. From what we know, it was an open API. It wasn't like a clever hack. It wasn't something that any one of us couldn't have probably done. That sort of thing is really down to the way that companies see cyber threats, how they see them as a risk. And risks, when you're dealing with a corporation, they're really worried about financial risks. So what's the financial risk to Optus of this breach? Actually, maybe they have to replace some passports. It's not that big. And there's a reputational damage which might cost them something. But the unfortunate story is that reputational damage in our modern world, where we have Twitter and everything else, is very quickly forgotten. So the chances are, 6 months from now, no one will remember this, and Optus will be operating in exactly the same way they were before. I would love to see them. I would love to see corporations have serious liabilities when things like this go wrong. The example that is sort of really interesting is the reason we have fire suppression systems in office buildings. We universally in Australia, if you have a big office building, there'll be some system that will help stop a fire. We don't have that because corporations are nice people and they don't want people to burn to death. We have that because insurance companies would not insure a building if it didn't have it. I think governments have a role to play in this. We as consumers have a role to play in this, but there needs to be a much better conversation about it all at that level of what this costs us in a tangible sort of way. you can't be just, oh, this is bad, this is, whatever. So, one of the things that, Optus will always keep my data as long as they don't have a cost associated with it. And that's sort of the problem.
So maybe I hear the sounds of a class action coming as a way to,
I think that's happening. And it's like when BP, when they did that massive leak in the Gulf of Mexico, they couldn't just say, oh, well, we are sorry, but deal with it, which is what Optus is telling us. They were asked to clean it.
So
it's rolled.
Thinking about things that can mitigate risks, I think one of the things that we can all do better is to educate ourselves and to become more mindful of the things that we should do in our work and in our own lives that will help to minimize cyber threats. I'd like to ask Hugh, from your point of view of someone who is, really living in the real world, when it comes to the sorts of education that we do in data science and IT and security within universities, are there any things that you would say, hey, look, here are some questions or issues that we would love for the next generation of data scientists or IT professionals to be aware of? Are there questions that stand out to you that we should be paying more attention?
I think when we think about the evolution of the risk, it's probably collaboration, I think, is the biggest part, because we can only secure ourselves for what we do know. And as I said earlier on, what I don't know is my biggest concern. And certainly in university institutions, there's a lot of systems. We've got 700 systems, and we're 700 systems, only 400 under active management. So there's 300 that are not. And in terms of the research space, how sensitive is that research? And I think we've built everything around, from a university perspective, rightly so, around collaboration, not security first. There's a balance that we need in the collaboration that we're going to need to drive towards that keeps us safe, but also helps us collaborate, because I think the balance is towards collaboration as opposed to safety today. And I think that's what we have to have a conversation on, educate, work out what that balance really looks like. And I think the government are active, certainly in the defense space. They have the DISP framework, of which we as QUT are now entering into, but to run that type of security across our entire environment is just absolutely cost prohibitive. So we need those risk assessments. We need to think around the language of risk, and that's probably an area that, given my background in oil and gas, where we manage to risk all the time, that's probably an education space that I think needs to be looked at, and there's an evolution that needs to come there quite rapidly.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think a risk assessment when it comes to working with data would be a good step in the right direction, thinking about my own experience, because there's often, you're working with data where if it was disclosed, it would have negligible impact. But, I think perhaps giving that more considered, weighing that up in a more considered way would be better. The last question that I want to put to the panel, I'm just going to throw this open because it's come up in various forms. My colleague Bernadette Highland-Wood is talking about policies, regulations. We haven't talked about GDPR, but just in terms of where Australia is at with regards to regulation and a policy, what are your thoughts about where we should be moving to so that we can enjoy the benefits of the digital domain without so many of the threats? Asha, do you want to bite?
Yes, sure. I think we need to actually at least get to GDPR. Most companies, or almost all companies in Australia, are following GDPR, but there is nothing that bites them in Australia if they don't comply. It's only the European Union can bite them, and that is the problem.
Okay, others? GDPR is a step we should be moving towards. What do you think, Matthew?
Well, let me take it in a different direction. I'm going to do a call out for mathematics. I think one of the things that mathematics and statistics can do is provide solutions for these problems that are really amazingly powerful, and they've been underutilized in a lot of ways. So we know that crypto math is the basis for a lot of the security of the world, and that's amazing, but there are other ways in which math can be used in this domain. Simple one is privacy preserving data mining, where people don't work on the raw data. So the raw data is effectively encrypted. No one can see it, but you can still perform the big data tasks that you want to do. There's a whole raft of formal methods for proving security in advance of potential threats. There's a vast amount that can be done with mathematics that is not yet out there.
Yep. Oh, that's great. I'm just holding in my head the thought that we're also big in quantum in Australia, and there are some challenges there. Leaving that to one side, Raja, your thoughts on regulation?
Yeah, I agree with Asha. We need to move to something like GDPR, and we probably need to go even further by providing mechanisms for defining what is personally identifiable data. And because there are continuously new ways that interested parties that can make a buck out of it are figuring out to extract information about us, even from something that seemingly is not possible. So I think we need to build into that future proofing, so that those novel threats to our privacy and our data are partially mitigated, at least.
Great. Hugh, last word to you on policy and regulation. Your thoughts?
Yeah, like I think here in Australia we do need more, and coming from having worked in the UK under GDPR in Europe rather, I think that there has a place to play. We have to increase from a policy perspective and a legislative perspective, but it needs to be fit for purpose, I think, and it needs to be that some agility in there, which is difficult to get to in policy, I know, but the world's moving at such a pace. We need to legislate for it.
Well, that's a good point on which to draw things to a close. I'm mindful that GDPR has includes the right for people's information to be forgotten. I hope that the information that we've generated today won't be forgotten. The recording will be made available through the Centre for Data Science website. We've had a lot of great questions, not all of which we've been able to get to. So I thank our audience very much for submitting those. Panelists, on behalf of all of our listeners, I really want to thank you for your time and your insights, and for your efforts in working in this interesting and challenging space. I'd like to thank the Queensland Academy of Arts and Science and the Queensland University of Technology Centre for Data Science for initiating and hosting the Data Science in the News series. It's an ongoing series, as you know, which looks at what's topical in the news. So stay tuned for future webinars on our website or the Twitter @QUT Data Science. Very special shout out to our colleagues Becky Cook and Tim McCougar for technical support and brilliant work behind the scenes. That's all for now. Have a great weekend, folks. Be safe in the real world and online. And thank you so much for being with us today. I'm David Lovell. Please go well. Take care. Bye.